front brakes and rotors on an 06 Altima. First things first, jack up the car, take off the tire. Alright, jack's down under there, leave the jack under there too, and start taking off the lug nuts here. In this case, these lug nuts are 21mm. Of course, if you don't have an impact, loosen off the lug nuts a bit when the car is still on the ground. Alright, tires off. First thing we're going to do is take off that caliper, and then we'll take off the rotor. The reason why I'm doing this on this car is because when I'm braking, it's a pulsing in the brake pedal, and I'm pretty sure these rotors are warped a bit. It's a 14mm socket, one on the top and one on the bottom. Take them out and then we'll pull the caliper off. Taking off the caliper, I usually just put a pry bar through the top here. Just push back, and as you can see, it's coming off pretty easily. Since I'm replacing these rotors, obviously and pads, I'm not being too careful, but you get the idea. See, there we go. So take that up, take a piece of wire, tie it up to the spring, and then move on to the next step. Alright, caliper's tied up. Pull out the pads. So, if they don't come that easily, just take a flathead and pry between there and and then it should come out. Alright, pads are off. Now we're going to take the bracket off. It's a 19mm, one bolt at the top, one bolt at the bottom. Alright, both bolts are out, bracket's off. Remember the orientation of these clips here, you'll probably get new ones with your brake pads. Sometimes you can reuse the old one, but whatever. If you got new ones, use them. Alright, in theory this rotor here is supposed to just slide right off. Once again, a little bit of rust going on. So I had to spray some penetrating oil around the seam there, and grab a rubber mallet and beat around the rotor a bit, grab an actual hammer, beat on this part here. That is if you're planning on saving the rotor, but I'm not. But just so you know, if you're reusing the rotor, you don't ever want to hit it on this face with a metal hammer. You're going to damage the integrity, and that's going to really mess up your pads, and it won't be a good job. So yeah, I'm just going to smack it around for a bit, lube it up a little bit more, and fight with it, and we'll get it off. Okay, after a little persuasion, it's off. So remove the rotor, and then we'll move along. Okay, that's what it looks like without the rotor on. I cleaned up the surface with a wire brush a bit, cleaned up all the threads on all the bolts. Gonna throw a little grease on them, and I'm gonna put the new the rotor on, and then we'll continue from there. Alright, on this particular car, there's a bit of an issue on the bracket. You see this one here, moves. That's so it can self-adjust, so the brake pad and everything is pressing evenly on the rotor. And this one is not going anywhere. You can't pull it, no nothing, it's seized right in there. So I'm going to have to try to take off this rubber boot a bit and spray some lube in there. Alright, I carefully pried on the bottom of that rubber boot and the top without breaking it, and got enough room to put my penetrating lube in there, and sprayed a bit in the bottom top, and then now the rubber is free, it moves around. I'm just going to let it sit for a bit and see if it creeps into the shaft in the bracket, and hopefully we don't have to take any more extreme measures to get it out. Alright, still not loosening up. So what I did is I put the bracket back on the steering knuckle so I can get some leverage. Instead of using some pliers, I'm going to grab a big crescent wrench and I'm going to hose the heck out of this thing inside the boot with some penetrating lube. I'm going to put a crescent wrench on there to get a better grip and go from there. So like this. And I filled this boot up again with some lube and just grabbed a big crescent wrench and just started working it back and forth really slowly, and it's starting to go. So I'm just going to keep on working it back and forth until it gets really loose, and then pull it out and clean that whole thing out, re-lube it and repack it and reinstall it. Alright, the saga continues. What's working, put a vice grip on the end of that. There's two flat spaces, obviously, on each side of the adjuster there. So I'm just pretty much just grabbing it, twisting it back and forth while pulling it forward towards the inside of the car. And as you can see, the boot is quite spread out, so this is going to work for me. So I'll get that taken off now. And there you go. Just pulls right out. There's nothing holding it in other than rust. But yeah, that was a little bit of a bitch to get out, but you know, persevere, man. It's out, so I'm going to blast some cleaner inside the hole there, clean it out with a pipe cleaner. Gonna scuff that off and clean it up and lube it back up. And I am gonna wash off this rubber boot. Spraying things like that with penetrating oil is really not in your best interest. Sometimes it swells stuff up and then it disintegrates the rubber, so just gonna take that to the sink quick and wash it off. Alright, got it all cleaned up, greased the hell out of it. Didn't install the rubber boot yet, but see, slides in there freely. That's what you want. Now I'm gonna install the rubber boot over it, or take it out and install the rubber boot over it and then put it back in, and then we'll go back to putting the rotor back on. Alright, rotor's back on, and now we're going to reinstall the bracket, and then we'll take out these brake clips and replace them with new ones and put the pads back in. Alright, a whole bunch of different brake clips, so what you're pretty much just going to have to do is just take the ones off of yours. I'm going to do this actually before I put the bracket back on, and then match them up and push the new ones in. They should clip right in there. If they're a bit dirty, just clean them out a bit with a wire brush again, and they'll snap in eventually. Alright, a little bit of differences with these. This is the top of the bracket. The one on the bottom of the bracket doesn't have these little wings on the corner, so I need a little bit of these and a little bit of these. Only two of them required, so you have to take a look at the subtle difference. This one has kind of like a hook on the top. This one here is kind of just like a little angle. But this one, that's a little hook on the top. So that's the one we're going to put in the top, and then we'll get to the bottom next. Alright, same kind of thing as the top. Just a little bit of an angle difference in part of the clip. Mine kind of looks just like an angle, but they also supply one's kind of like a little hook on the top, kind of like the top on this one that I put in. But in this case, I need the angled one. So throw that in there, and then we'll install the bracket. Okay, bracket's back on, clips are in, rotor's on. Gonna throw the pads in next. Alright, here's the new pads. These little things on the side are indicators. That's the little thing that squeals first when your brakes are starting to get low. It's supposed to tell you when to change your brakes, for some people anyway. So yeah, I usually pay attention when taking it off. This was the one I took off the front of this bracket, and here's the rear one. They all have brake indicators. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just one side. So just pay attention, just like the clips that went in the bracket. Yeah, just install it exactly the reverse of removal. and you won't have any problems. Okay, pads are in. In this case, both indicators were at the bottom of the pad. So a lot of the times there's only one, and it's usually on the back, but regardless, this is the way this one was taken apart, and that's the way it's going back together. So pads are on there. I'm going to put the caliper on next. And untie it there, and got to compress the piston inside, and that'll allow us the room. We need to slip it back over these two pads here. Okay, another thing I like to do, I like to take the cap off the power steering, brake fluid. Like so, before I start compressing the piston. Reason being, 90% of the time you don't have to do it, but sometimes a shop will say that you're low on brake fluid, and they'll add more brake fluid to that when your pads are really low. And then so when you put on new pads and you compress the piston, it'll actually be too much brake fluid in there, and then it'll pop your cap off, and it'll leak all over everywhere. So if shop ever asks you that if you want to top up your brake fluid, chances are you're getting low on pads, and yeah, you should really never have to top off the fluid unless you got a leak somewhere in the line, which should be addressed immediately for other concerns, like stopping. So yeah, just a little tip: don't top up your brake fluid if your lines ain't leaking, and if they're leaking, go get it fixed right away before you kill yourself. Alright, here's the caliper flipped upside down, so I'm going to leave it for compressing this piston in, which is this thing right here. What I do is I take a block of wood, and I take a big C-clamp, and I put it on the back side there, and I compress this piece of wood into there, and it pushes the piston in. Alright, so this is how I'm going to do it here. See, I'm on the back. There really was no lip or anything I could put it on, so I'm just putting it on the top of the bolt that holds the brake line in, and the other side's on this side. I'm just going to turn it, and it's going to compress that piston there. Okay, piston's compressed. You see how there's nothing left there now? Now you should be able to do this by hand. You don't need to put an excessive amount of force on it or anything, or there's something wrong with your caliper. If you need to like really reef on it to get this piston to go back in, you should replace your caliper. But yeah, should just be able to be turned in by hand very easily. And then now we're going to back this off, and then we're going to put it over the brake pads. Another little thing, you see that there is a flat spot on the back of this caliper where it should go in. Well, it needs to be on a flat spot on the part where it bolts in too, just for saying's sake. It goes back together like that. Okay, everything's back together. Caliper's on. Now I just got to tighten up the top and bottom nuts on the caliper. It's a 14 mil, and don't forget to make sure you double check everything. It's an 18 mil on the bracket itself. So yeah, make sure everything's nice and tight, and yeah, put the tire back on, and then you're finished. Okay, tires back on, everything's snugged up everywhere. And now we're going to go work on the other side. I won't put you through the video taking of the other side since it's the exact same as this side, but there's some steps to do after we're done. Both front brakes that you need to take before you drive the car away. So I'll get to the other side, and then I'll be right back. Just going to lower the vehicle down. Then we're going to replace the cap on the brake fluid reservoir. Just like so. There you go. Close the hood. Alright. And then last but not least, very important step. After you do any brakes of any kind, front, back, drum, rotor, whatever, you're going to want to sit in the vehicle with it off. And you're going to want to pump the brake pedal until it gets firm. Just like that. It just snugs your pads back up to the rotor, pushes the piston out. If you don't do that before you take off, your first braking experience is going to be a little bit interesting. You're not going to be able to brake right away. It's going to go to the ground. So don't forget this step. And yeah, that concludes it. That's how to change front brakes on a 06 Altima.